next. So now I'd like to introduce to you Teri Dreher of North Shore Patient Advocates.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. What an honor. I am so happy to be here with this esteemed panel. So an RN patient advocate is something like a care manager. Most people know what a care manager is in the hospital. They're the ones that get people in and out of the hospital quickly. But an RN care manager or a patient advocate in the community wears quite a few different hats. We have the extra advantage of being medically trained. In other words, I used to be an ICU nurse for 39 years before I started my own patient advocacy business. And we have a little bit more of a broad scope when we get called in by adult children or families that are experiencing health decline with one of their parents. We come in kind of like a helicopter pilot, I say. We come in and we look at not only the physical problems people are having, but the emotional issues, the stress on the entire family, as well as what it's doing to the spouse. Also, a lot of dementia crises are happening right now during the pandemic. We've had an awful lot of families coming and saying, you know, my mom has lost 25 pounds the last 6 months. My dad's walking outside in the middle of the winter all the time, and we feel he's unsafe. We just can't deal with this anymore. And the kids are traveling from all over Chicagoland trying to help and take turns. And so we come in and we sit down and find out what everybody's concerns are, what the goals are, what the financial capacity is. And sometimes we get involved in situations where we can see that there's some red flags that have to do with possibility of financial exploitation. And this happens in all different social strata. You don't have to have a lot of money to have family members or caregivers trying to exploit an individual, but it happens more often with senior orphans. And senior orphans are those people that simply do not have any family close by. Quite often caregivers or so-called friends or students or things like that will befriend a senior, and as their cognitive abilities decline, that person becomes indispensable, and before you know it, they find themselves in the will, or they start volunteering to write their bills for them, or to become their power of attorney for healthcare and their estate. And you might find out-of-state adult children coming to them saying, I need a down payment on a house, or a grandchild that's having financial problems and needs a new car, and all kinds of things. The sad case is that most financial exploitation is done by somebody that actually knows the senior. And it's very sad because seniors get more isolated as they get older, and they think these people are their friends, and they become, it's almost like a Stockholm syndrome. They almost become prisoners of that person. The person starts doing everything for them, and before you know it, they become afraid to say anything. I had a situation a few months ago that actually Kerry knows about, where this person found herself with a brand new high-end Volvo SUV that the man thought he was buying for himself, but before he knew it, it was bought in the name of the personal assistant. And it's just really sad. And she was at the lawyer's office writing herself into the will to the tune of $4 million. So these things happen more often than we would like to. And when we see these red flags, the first thing we do is try to get our favorite elder law attorney involved. But we also find ourselves in situations where we can sit down and have serious conversations with family members that are withholding money because they're afraid they're not going to get an inheritance. They're saying, oh no, I can do that. Mom doesn't really need that. I can do it all. And that's another more subtle form of financial exploitation. So we like to get legal counsel or adult protective services or other people involved. And sometimes we can have that conversation kindly and firmly with people and kind of nip it in the bud early enough. But when large amounts of money are involved, sometimes we need help. And so if you have a sense in your heart about somebody in your neighborhood, somebody that you know, somebody that maybe your parents or grandparents know, that there are some of these red flags going on, don't ignore it. Just call somebody and ask for some advice, because if your instinct tells you that there's some funny business going on, call the police, make a report. Sometimes adult protective services has to be called 3, 4, 5 times before something is actually done. It's a very serious thing to get guardianship involved. And I know Kerry's going to talk about that soon, but don't ignore it, because the public is the best defense against these exploiters continuing to do what they do, because oftentimes they're doing this over and over and over again, and it's a heinous crime. Exploiting senior orphans is as bad in my mind as sexual abuse of children, and it has to be stopped. These are vulnerable people in our society, and we need to protect them. And it takes a village, or it takes a whole society to stand up and say enough is enough. And I just really look forward to the questions that you have at the end, but our inpatient advocates and care managers see this all the time. And if you ever have any questions, just reach out and ask any of us if you have any suspicions whatsoever. Thank you. And one other thing I want to say, if you ever know any family who's finding a senior that's giving away large sums of money or gifts, and they don't have a lot of money, they could actually shoot themselves in the foot if they ever need to go on Medicaid, because if people give away too much money and they end up needing Medicaid, there's a 5-year spend down. And if you've given away too much money, you might disqualify yourself or make it very difficult to get Medicaid, which you might need to live the end of your life in a skilled nursing facility. So that's another red flag to look out for. Okay, I think that's all for me.
Thank you, Teri. You brought up such really important aspects of it, where people don't realize how they can jeopardize their future with Medicaid. And so, it's not like someone who's younger that can recoup a lost investment. This nest egg needs to carry people, to end of life. And 7 out of 10 of us over the age of 65 are going to need, some sort of care. So Teri has certainly helped me out with folks that I've come across where I suspect that this is going on, and they're sort of deep into it and sort of need that objective person to sort of pull them out of it. So really appreciate the work that you do. But that brings us then to moving back a little bit earlier in our lives as we're planning. And I'd like to introduce Keith Piscatello. And Keith,
Nancy?
Thank you, Keith. And Keith, maybe you can talk to us about, how we can prevent from getting to that point. I think that one of the things that's so surprising is this is something that can happen to anyone. It could be the most educated person. It could be someone that, worked all their life in accounting and knows better. And yet with the aging process and what happens with our cognitive abilities, we can start out with you and have the best plans laid in place. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about what we can do, way before this happens?
Sure, be happy to. Thank you for having me. As Nancy said, this can happen to anyone. My father is a bright gentleman. He college educated, has a master's degree in finance, has worked in commercial banking for 50 years, had to go through red flag training on an annual basis. And yet after he retired, when he was 73, 74 years old, he fell victim to a scam himself. And I would think that he would know better, but the emotions were such that he didn't think about it. So let's talk about how this can happen. And before we start, I just wanted to give you an idea of, share a story with you. Last Friday night, it was much colder than it's been in the Chicago area recently. It was only about 20 degrees outside, and my dog got skunked. And I thought that the skunk should be, hibernating for the winter, but apparently one wasn't. And my question, may lead you to believe, ask the question, what does this have to do with senior financial exploitation? And I ask you just to stick with me here. According to the National Council on Aging, over 5 million seniors fall prey to senior exploitation every year. And the estimated losses annually by these older Americans may be as high as $36.5 billion with a B. Understanding why older Americans may be susceptible and then building a plan to reduce the risk is imperative to protect their dignity as well as their security. Now, back in the 1960s, there was a psychologist, a researcher named Raymond Cattell, and he first dissected intelligence into two types: crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. When my dog Bailey met Pepe Le Pew, she filed that experience away in her memory banks. The negative effect of getting sprayed and the post-spray bath was also burned into her brain as part of her crystallized intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is just part of our intelligence that's developed and strengthened over time. It's an accumulation of facts. This is our mind's muscle memory that goes into effect without necessarily having to concentrate. So if I asked you what's 2 plus 2, you would automatically say it's 4. But if I asked you what's 358 times 463, you may have to think a little bit more about that. That's not as crystallized because there's more computation that has to go with that. As we live, our experiences continue to wear familiar, well-trodden paths in our brain so that we can act without consciously thinking. Speaking, reading, riding a bike, and driving a car all utilize our crystallized intelligence. If you've ever driven home from work without thinking about your route or how you drove, and you feel like you put yourself on autopilot, you were relying on your crystallized intelligence. The first time we try something new, it may be difficult or even painful, but the more trials we have, the easier it becomes. As we learn new skills and try new experiences throughout our lives, our crystallized intelligence continues to grow, never stops growing. Every time you have new experiences, you continue to build those as part of your crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence, though, is the creative ability to use logic and reasoning to analyze new information to solve problems. So fluid intelligence helps us understand how we relate to the environment around us and helps us remember where we put things, what needs to be done, how things relate to each other. This is the part of intelligence that allows individuals to look at a scenario and decide on the best potential outcomes based on their actual or inferred knowledge. So if you're driving a car, fluid intelligence will help you decide when it's safe to merge or how to change a route when a detour might save you some time. If my dog Bailey ever comes face to face with another skunk, hopefully she will have the fluid intelligence needed to avoid a problem, that she'll be able to recall what the skunk looks like and infer that it might be in her best interest not to go there again, run the other way. Now, I said earlier that crystallized intelligence continues to accumulate over your lifetime. Studies have shown, though, that from the time we're born until age 50, our fluid intelligence continues to increase. However, after age 50, we continue to show a decline in our fluid intelligence that limits our ability to use logic and reasoning to solve problems. In fact, according to a 2015 study by the Center for Retirement Research, it's estimated that 50% of the 80-year-old population would have difficulty making complicated financial decisions. It just becomes that much more difficult as we age to use our crystallized intent, those facts and information we had, and to think creatively to figure out what's actually going on. So if losing our fluid intelligence as we age is likely, and dubious characters out there realize that they can take advantage of that fact, what can be done to mitigate the risk of elder financial exploitation? There's 4 keys. The first is simplify. As our lives become more messy over time, taking some time to consolidate as many accounts in one place, maybe on as few number of statements as possible, makes your life easier as an elder because you don't have as many random sheets of paper coming in the mail. It's easier to keep track of how your accounts are doing. And it's also easier for children if they need to step in and be their surrogate under a power of attorney, a durable power of attorney, to be able to manage those, because they'll have only a single or a few people to talk with regarding those accounts. The second thing is to maybe consider the services of a daily money manager. A daily money manager is someone who can be hired to pay the bills. It's usually a bookkeeper or an accountant. They will help make sure that bills are paid on time, insurance policies don't lapse, utilities don't get turned off, and they're licensed, they're bonded, and you can have confidence that they're going to look out for making sure the bills get paid for them. The third thing is you want to automate cash flow as much as possible. Try to avoid getting random checks coming in the mail for dividends and interest. I know some people like, especially older individuals, like to hold it in their hand and bring it to the teller to pay it, to deposit in their account. As much as you can set up that's automated is going to make their life easier. It's also going to reduce risks of their mail being stolen or checks getting lost and never deposited. The final thing is to open lines of communication. Explain to your loved one your concerns about them becoming a victim, and make sure that if they have powers of attorney, that those powers of attorney are shared with their banks and their investment firms. And if possible, request that you're named or someone is named as a trusted contact in the event of a cognitive decline. If there's concerns there, they can reach out, maybe not even share information about the account, but just say, hey, we saw some suspicious activity. Maybe you should reach out to your dad, your mom, to find out if everything's okay. We have on our website an assessment that you can take. It's a free assessment. It's at the website above me, s2wealth.com. What's my score? With that, they'll ask you about 15 questions for your loved one or yourself to find out what is the risk of you falling as a subject to financial manipulation or other problems. And also will provide you then with a feedback on here's some steps that you can take to lessen the chance that you'll become a victim of financial abuse. So with that, again, take your time. It's any time after we're done here. You're more than welcome to do that. Everything is completely confidential, and we'll follow up with you and give you that guidance so that you can make smart decisions for your loved one. Nancy?
Thank you, Keith. That is, so helpful. I remember when I saw you post that article, it really hit home with me about crystallized memory, fluid memory, how early it starts in our 50s. And as someone there, I can believe that. yet when I meet families down the road, I realize that a lot of what's going on, started years and years ago. And, the family didn't realize it. No one likes to look at their parent as not being capable, and so they tend not to question when in fact a lot of things can be going on when it appears that everything is okay, only to find out that some really bad decisions were made. And now that nest egg has, dwindled or has disappeared, and really affects their options for care later in life. So thank you for all that. It's something for all of us to think about way before we experience people who are deeply being exploited, but the subtleties start much sooner. So that brings me next to our next panelist, which is Kerry Peck of Peck Ritchie, who has tremendous experience in helping people get their affairs together way before, and then also working with families when they don't. And this is especially important, as was brought up with dementia. We have so many people that are now diagnosed with some form of dementia and kind of miss that opportunity of getting their affairs in order. And all of a sudden, I get the crisis call. What do we do? Mom won't move, but nobody has power of attorney. This is when we bring in Kerry Peck to help us sort through this. So without further ado, Kerry.
Thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here today, along with Nancy and Keith and Teri. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this terrific seminar. As Nancy said, I lead the law firm of Peck Ritchie, and as you can see on your screen, we have offices in the downtown Chicago Metro North, Chicago Metro West, and our focus really is the arena of aging, disability, death, dying, and taxes, which translates to problems of aging, and it translates into financial exploitation. Translates into bang it out in the courtroom. Judge, we need to protect this older adult against financial exploitation. And as Teri said, financial exploitation comes in all different forms. It typically comes from loving family members who love the older adult more, lot less than they love the money for that older adult. So at the end of the day, I think the easiest way to kind of demonstrate all of this is with a short scenario. And that is that as follows. Paul and Kathy have been married for many, many years. Paul was diagnosed with early onset dementia, and just shortly before Kathy died. His wife of decades has died. Paul is completely taken aback. He's disoriented. But as he often did during Kathy's relationship with him, when things went south a little bit, he'd go to church. And sometimes Kathy would go to church with him as well. Paul goes to church every Sunday after Kathy dies. And about the fourth or fifth Sunday, Paul sits down in his regular pew, and sitting next to him is just a knockout of a woman. She is a good 30 years younger. She is built unbelievable. She's got fancy clothes, fancy jewelry, and oh my God, she's interested in Paul. Can you believe it? And she expresses her condolences to Paul and says, "Oh, Paul, I'm so sorry that Kathy died. My name is doesn't matter, Joanna, and Joanna, I'm here to make sure, Paul, that everything goes smoothly for you the rest of your life." And how does Joanna want to do that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, she takes Paul that afternoon after church back to his house and shows him the time of his life. And he's like, "Oh my God, what happened here? I just met this woman at church." That's on Sunday. On Monday, Joanna's got a different game plan. And that game plan is she runs Paul over to his stockbroker. And then she runs Paul's over to his bank. And then she runs Paul's over to his accountant. And each one fortunately says, hey, I don't know you, Joanna, and I don't think I'm going to give you much information, but Paul is so smitten with Joanna like that. Honey, don't worry, whatever you need to know, I'm going to tell you. And guess what? And we're now 3 days into this whirlwind relationship, and Joanna says, Paul, you know, Kathy's gone. Your children live in California. We're in Chicago. And I think the smartest thing we can do is for you to name me your agent under your power of attorney for property. And Joanna carts Paul off immediately to her divorce lawyer, who has already written out the power of attorney for property. And guess what? Paul, is it okay if Joanna's your agent? Anything Joanna wants, that's what I'm going to do for her. And what happens? Joanna's now power of attorney agent. And bingo, next morning she's at the bank withdrawing Paul's money. Bingo, the next day she's at the stockbroker asking for withdrawals. And what do? When Nancy or Keith or Terry call me? The first thing we do is assess whether or not Paul has the mental capacity to make these decisions. And because he was diagnosed with some form of dementia early onset, we're concerned that he does not. And as a result, I have him evaluated by either his attending physician or a physician we work with to write a report as to his cognitive ability. And what are we doing with this? We're going to determine, is Paul a candidate for guardianship? Do we need to go on an emergency guardianship for Paul and have someone appointed to make decisions for him to freeze his assets so that Joanna can't steal them anymore, and to suspend and revoke her power of attorney? So first step, medical report. Second step, file the documents. The court will appoint a guardian ad litem to go out and see Paul. Paul, how you doing? I want to advise you of your rights. I want to give you a mini mental status exam and report back to the court. So guardianship is an emergency procedure to protect older adults from financial exploitation. And we do it all too frequently because financial exploitation, like COVID, is an epidemic. It's not a pandemic, it's an epidemic. Older adults are being cheated every single day, more often than not, as I said, by their family. But now today, caregivers, they meet people that we thought were safe locations at synagogues, at churches. And I'm not going to lump all caregivers. Not all caregivers by a long shot are bad. We have bad apple caregivers, and everybody's experienced it. So you can see up on the slide, you know, as Keith said, you know, the Center for Elder Abuse, many people are abused by family members. Common signs, you know, sudden withdrawals. We find out that older adults are signing deeds to their houses. We find older adults are signing trust amendments. A trust amendment, unlike a will, doesn't require witnesses. Trust amendment, add somebody new. Crazy law, reality. A trusted contact, you know, the banking industry, the brokerage industry has pushed on a trusted contact. Name someone when you open an account that the agency, the financial institution, can rely on to determine if you're being abused. And finally, as I said, temporary guardianship is a big arrow in the quiver of attorneys, elder law attorneys, to protect this financial exploitation. So if we can help you, we offer an initial consultation at no cost. And thank you for your kind attention and for joining us this afternoon.
Oh yes, that's some very, that's quite the story. And I think it also, you know, shows that it's not just people with dementia, but, you know, as we age, we're constantly faced with loss, you know, loss of a spouse, friendships, the loneliness, and, you know, deep grief can cause people to do something and trust someone, you know, so quickly. as you pointed out in that story. So thank you very much for that. So I'd like to open up for any questions or discussion, either through the chat or I don't know, Misha, can they ask us or do they have to do it through chat?
It seems like they have to do it through chat.
Okay. So if you have a question, for any one of us, or just type the message in the chat or anything that you would like to add.
Does anybody have any unique questions that we didn't address today? We got through a little bit early. One of the unique things about the COVID pandemic that I wanted to point out is that we find that dementia is progressing more rapidly with isolation. And so if you know people over 75 or 80 that are isolated, it's really hard to know sometimes if people are being exploited because they're just not out and about as much anymore. So there are various forms, scams and everything. So if you have unique situations that you want to ask about, now's your chance to get some good, safe advice from our panel of experts.
While we're waiting for this as well, Nancy, I think, in my speaking portion, I talked about the fact that our fluid intelligence tends to drop off. There are certain things that people can do, though, to help improve their fluid intelligence and keep it from dropping off as quickly. If we have some time, I'll go through those real quickly. One is to think creatively, to listen to music, to do art, to do other things, to get your creative mind flowing, to find new things to do, whether it's driving a new way home than you wouldn't have done. The things that we normally do that you seem to fall into a trance and turns your brain on autopilot, if we can get it off autopilot and force you to think about, all right, if I go this way home, I'll see different things. I'll be thinking different things. I'll look at things from a different point of view. Technology has made our life so simple. Everything from Google to look up stuff instead of looking up things, information at your library, to following on GPS. We've dumbed everything down for ourselves. So we need to keep our brains active. Socialize safely. Kerry had a story about, Paul who went to church. You think that'd be a safe place to go. Find safe places where you can have your older loved one be social, whether that's a senior center or a grief group or something else if they're grieving. Keep the challenges coming. Always try new things, different things. Don't take the easy way out. Exercise has been shown to be a great way to stave off the fluid intelligence waning. Meditation is great. Learning a new language. So you have to think differently. You have to use different parts of your brain that you wouldn't otherwise do. A lot of local community colleges and other colleges offer classes that you can take just as at a low cost, just to audit it. Misha will like this one. One of the best ways they found to build fluid intelligence is by playing chess. It forces you to not only think about what your moves going to be, but how I'm going to react if they do something else to us. And probably the easiest one that most people forget about is to get enough sleep. If you're not getting enough sleep, you're going to be overtired. Your brain's going to be not as clear as it would be otherwise. We've, as a nation, have gotten away, and we're chronically overtired. At least 8-9 hours of sleep is important to get. Drink enough water as well. A couple great things, ideas to help maintain your fluid intelligence so that you don't become a victim of financial, hopefully, don't become a victim of financial exploitation.
Those are great points, Keith, and nutrition as well, I think, is really important.
Sure.
We do have a question from Karen Hansen, who says that she works with assessing seniors by doing in-home assessments. Please comment on concerns I should watch for when a family member always insists on being present during any visits. Yeah, I think the family exploitation is the one that's really the most difficult to work with. I mean, when it's someone from the outside and it's very obvious, we can, come in. But when we're dealing with families who are seeking guardianship, and yet there's all this guilt associated with it because of what that means. I mean, I've personally seen it in my own family, where, even though things were happening, going for guardianship was just something that this, executor did not want to do. So I think, when you're dealing with families and it's happening, can someone maybe speak to that, Teri?
Yeah, I am not shy at all about asking them to leave. And I know Kerry would not be shy about doing that either. There are times when you really need to just politely say, I'd like to interview so-and-so alone for a few moments. And that happened not too long ago with a case where there was definite signs of financial exploitation, and the senior felt very comfortable confirming that there were definite signs of exploitation. He was able to share those with the attorney. So you have a right to ask to interview the person by themselves. That's a definite red flag when they're hovering like that.
Yeah, I mean, Kerry, how do you deal with that? I mean, I've seen where you've got this person that's vulnerable, their children are involved, and so yeah, they know what's going on. They've kind of created this situation, and yet they don't want anyone to do anything about it because, after all, it is their child, even though they're doing and exploiting them. Kerry, how do you deal with that with families?
Well, we see this on a pretty regular basis when people call up and it's usually a child who calls up and says, hi, I want to bring in mom and do her estate planning. And so mom comes in with, the kids in tow, 2 or 3 children, adult children, and they all come into the conference room and they sit down and the children start to tell us what mom wants in her will. And I'm very patient for about 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes, I tell them that they can drink as much coffee as they wish in our law firm out in the lobby. And we have the best coffee, in the face of the earth, because you're going to find out you're being asked to leave the conference room. And inevitably, they do leave. They're all pretty horrified. And it wouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that tuned in today that what mom wants to do with her assets is quite a bit different than what the children want to tell us mom wants to do with her assets. So I think that, and agree with Teri, there clearly are times and methods of separating out a potential exploiter from the abused person. And I think the estate planning scenario, the estate planning is kind of subtle financial exploitation. It becomes less subtle when mom is dead. But when mom's alive, the kids come in and we love mom so much and we love mom so much, as long as she gives us her money in the manner we direct and the proportions we direct. So that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, here's another question from Jenna. What is your advice for a family member who is trying to help their parent? The person is not safe at home, but refusing to move. Example, they're running out of money, the home is falling apart. The family has even called Adult Protective Services, but he wasn't doing bad enough to be removed from his home. However, without intervention, his funds will be depleted in a year with home repairs costing more than this parent has. Should the family member get a guardian to step in? Parent has dementia. Very good question.
I think that's one for Kerry.
Go ahead, Teri, please.
No, that's where we get calls all the time for this. And the first thing I would do is call Kerry on a case like this, because nobody knows dementia in the law like Kerry does. And if this parent has dementia, he doesn't have the right to stay there. And Kerry can talk to the family about the steps necessary, have him evaluated for competency, and then, get guardianship and get him in a safe environment. Because if the family continues to keep him in an unsafe environment, he's going to hurt himself. Am I right, Kerry?
No, I agree 100%. One of the things, though, that everybody needs to know about guardianship, and it's kind of a difficult thing to swallow, that is that we can have a guardian appointed for someone, but that guardian does not have the power to force someone into a facility against their will.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty significant. The only way you can force someone into a facility is in a mental health proceeding. And that mental health proceeding is, an involuntary commitment scenario. But if I have a guardian appointed for, Jane Doe, and Jane doesn't want to go to name the facility, we can't force her to go. Now, what's interesting is in well over 90% of the cases I've had over the years, when the judge tells that older adult, it's time to go to Northbrook, or it's time to go to Brookdale, the person generally goes.
Mhm.
They don't want to listen at all to the children. But when the judge with the black robe sitting on the bench up above says it's time to go to the facility, they generally go. So that's kind of an interesting scenario.
Yeah, I think, I come across people that say, maybe you can talk to this, Kerry, this is kind of simplistic, but I see this question come up all the time. People are like, well, I've got power of attorney. So they think, they can make, any decisions. And you're even saying, even with the threshold of guardianship, they're still not able to. So that's very interesting. And it's not easy to get guardianship. Maybe you can speak to the difference between, let's say, a healthcare power of attorney and guardianship, and what that really means.
Sure. As you know, in Illinois, we have two types of powers of attorney. One is a power of attorney for property, which is asset management. And the second is a power of attorney for healthcare, which is medical decision management. And both of those documents in Illinois should be statutory durable powers of attorney. Durability means that when one is cognitively impaired, the power of attorney continues in existence.
Mm-hmm.
Guardianship is typically the last resort and the result of no powers of attorney in place. Okay, if I go into the hospital, I'm unconscious and I have no power of attorney, and nobody is able to legally make decisions for me, the hospital is going to file for guardianship so that a guardian can be appointed to grant informed consent to a surgical procedure that I may need. So the difference is quite dramatic. In order to sign a power of attorney, you need what we call contractual capacity, cognitive ability. And in order to appoint a guardian, which is a third party decision maker, the court decides that an individual lacks totally incapable of making decisions regarding asset and medical care, or partially incapable. If they're totally incapable, they're ultimately going to get what we call a plenary guardian, plenary. If they're only partially incapable, they're going to get a limited guardian. And if we're rushing in an emergency, financial exploitation, or surgery, we're asking for a temporary guardian. And so we've got all these kind of different shapes and forms, but they're all based on medical evidence. Medical evidence. What does a doctor say about the older adult's cognitive ability?
Yeah, and the other thing I will say that Kerry alluded to too, it is true that you can't force people during a guardianship to do certain things, but there are ways around it. And he gave one excellent example. I recently had a case that was kind of challenging for a son. The son had been paying for his father to live in a $6,000 a month apartment that he clearly couldn't afford. He was supporting his father, who had nothing but a Social Security income of $2,500 a month. The man ended up having a medical event, went into the hospital. They sent him to rehab. The son hired me to go in. The man definitely has dementia. And so he hired me to come in and kind of sweet talk him into doing the right thing. And so after a period of time of him telling me over and over and over again that he wanted to go back to his apartment, which was a hoarder's nightmare, the son couldn't afford it anymore. And there's a way of telling the truth with kindness and firmness over and over and over again. And we did get him into a very lovely assisted living place. And the man is deliriously happy. And it doesn't hurt that the assisted living director is a very attractive nurse that knows how to sweet talk older men. So there are ways of talking to people that are resistant to help. And one of the signs of dementia is being paranoid and resistant to help. When you're in the mid stage of dementia, nobody wants to go for guardianship. That's a last resort. Nobody wants to take away anybody's rights. And most of the time, we can collaborate and mediate and get people to do the right things so they don't hurt themselves. Now, Stella Melman has a great question.
Yeah, go ahead, Teri. Yeah,
Yes.
Stella with Accurate Private Care has a great question. Go ahead and take that.
Question. What's a good way to deal with a POA if they're refusing to get proper amount of care needed for their loved one? Stella, are you suggesting that there's red flags of senior financial exploitation?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've seen that before too. And I just educate them and tell stories about what's happened in the past. If someone falls all the time and the only thing that the daughter wants is 2 or 3 hours of care, and the senior wants to stay in their house, but they have enough money to pay for 24-hour care, then I talk to them about safety and patient rights. And you know, if the parent is cognizant and capable of making their own decision, then you always want the patient to have agency over their own lives and autonomy over their own healthcare decision. It's the #1 pillar of medical ethics. So,
yeah, Teri, along those lines as well, you know, when it's important for us to get the proper paperwork in order before you need it. So once you finish visiting with your estate planning attorney like Kerry or other estate planning attorney, you know, have a meeting with the older adult and whoever they've named as the power of attorney agent, so that there's clarity on what their wishes are. Because the earlier you have that discussion, the easier it is to go back and say, remember when we had this discussion, you said you want to make sure you were safe and you want to make sure I look out for your safety. Well, this is what you told me you wanted to do. Now is the time to do that.
Yeah.
Similarly, once those documents are signed and you've had those meetings, make sure that you get copies of those powers of attorney for healthcare to your doctor so they can scan it into your file so you don't go looking for it when there's an emergency, and get copies of it to your bank and your investment advisor if you have one, so that they can have it on file as well, so that someone else comes in saying that we've got a new power of attorney, at least we can make sure that what we have is hopefully the current one, and we can avoid there being problems down the road.
Here's another angle on that, because I know Stella, she runs a fantastic home care agency, but she probably sees this in her practice, that she's providing, you know, caregivers to come in and help someone, but you know, realizes that what they're wanting to pay for and do is not enough. And, does that put her in, a vulnerable situation, as being that provider for healthcare when they won't get enough care?
I would ask if the power of attorney is in place. Is this patient incapable of making their own decisions? Because the power of attorney isn't enacted if the patient can still make their own decisions. Correct, Kerry?
Yes, that's.
Well, the answer is yes, correct, but it's very fuzzy. And when someone holds an agency under a power of attorney for healthcare, they're in there to make decisions regardless of how things are going.
Okay.
Don't forget though, this is very interesting, an aberration in the law, in my opinion, but a healthcare power of attorney can be revoked regardless of mental capacity. So that's pretty dramatic. The opposite is true for a power of attorney for property. You cannot revoke a power of attorney for property unless you're competent. So, in our various hypothetical questions here, we're not really sure about the capability of the older adult, the principal who was granted an agency to the other individual, but it can be revoked. And often, and it's again a last resort, if an agent is abusing their power of attorney, even to the point of not getting proper care, that's when we go into probate court and ask that agency be revoked, suspended, and potentially filed for guardianship. But as Keith suggested, all of this is a scenario where preventive planning is the best route. Do it when you're capable, do it when you're competent, do it before you're diagnosed with any form of dementia. But, often if it's early in the disease diagnosis, you can still do planning.
Great. So Linda has a question, but I think I'm going to save yours to kind of wrap up our presentation here today. I'm first going to go to Nicole. This is a very specific question. Have you ever seen where a spouse is financially exploiting a senior with dementia, or seen where an adult child can get guardianship even though there is a spouse?
The answer is yes, I've seen it many times. And the parent and the corollary to that is alleging that a spouse is committing financial exploitation is a very difficult case to prove. Unless that spouse is siphoning off money into her own account, it's almost impossible to demonstrate that a spouse is taking advantage of their spouse.
And sometimes there's second marriages too, which create a whole level that's a little bit easier. So I can see where that would be a possibility. So Linda is with Case Management and Social Work Magazine, and she is working on an article about senior exploitation. And so she has kind of a broad question that I'll throw out to all of you, which is, what advice would you give to a case manager in a situation in this matter?
Which one, Linda?
I think the advice to give to a case manager is keep your wits about you, know what's going on, because you could unwittingly be part of that exploitation. And I think that case managers need to understand what are the red flags here, and the red flags are you don't want to get drawn into being an unknowing member of a conspiracy to exploit. I mean, and that's kind of a mouthful, but that's the reality. You need to know what those red flags are, and you need to know how to overcome it. And I think case managers are in a precarious position because they're often seeing what's going on behind closed doors. But don't forget, if you have a license, you have an obligation to report. You're a mandated reporter of elder abuse. And, I was hired many years ago by Mayor Daley in the Department of Aging to rewrite the state of Illinois Elder Abuse and Neglect Act. And mandated reporting is a critical part of the elder abuse and neglect system, the APS system. So, you know, if you see something, you know, this phrase, do something.
Excellent. Any final words, Teri? And Keith?
Thank you for everybody who showed up today. If we even shared one thing that could help one person, I think it's well worth it. And we love the fact that you all took the time to be with us today and just save our contact information and stay in touch. We love being with you and sharing what we know, and we're very happy to be with you. So thank you so much, all of you. And go ahead and take out your cell phones and click and save our contact information. And I'm very, very grateful to Senior Living Experts for hosting this and for being on the panel with such esteemed presenters as Kerry and Keith, and just thank you so much, Nancy and Misha. Very, very grateful to all of you.
Thank you, Teri. Keith, any final words?
Yeah, I would say, you know, one of the keys is to avoiding financial exploitation is really to keep things as simple as possible, to have open communication, to not be afraid to ask questions about, you know, your loved one's finances, financial situation. If there's new people that come into their life, ask questions about them. Make it, you know, set some boundaries. You know, if you wanted to take out more than $1,000, we want to make sure that we know where it's going to. Perhaps set up a debit card or credit card that has some daily limitations so that they can't be wiped out in full. But you know, keep things as simple as possible, because that's going to make it your life that much easier, as well as your loved one.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening on this very important topic. And we appreciate you listening. And thank you, Teri, Keith, and Kerry, for your great expertise and insight on this. So thank you all.
Yes, and we are sharing it later too. So
Thank you. This will be recorded and posted online as well, for those that want to share. And yes, thank you all. And looking forward to the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye now.
Thanks. Bye-bye.